Hello, and welcome back to the All Out Soccer podcast. Myself, Jeremy Goldstein, and my co-host, Joseph McBride, we're two football fans talking about soccer. We focus on a fusion of the MLS, the US men's and women's soccer teams, and the build-up to the 2026 World Cup. It's playoff week this week, Joe. How you doing?
I'm a bit tired. I'm in the UK back home for a little bit, so I've been staying up very late to watch these playoff games, but all good. There's been some cracking stuff over the last few days.
Yeah, that LA one must have kicked off really late last night for you.
Yes, 3 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, pretty good game overall. This week, we're going to rapid fire through some results. Obviously, we're smack in the middle of the playoffs. Some teams have been eliminated already from the first round. Some still have all to play for in a decisive third game. Some have yet to play a second game. Really unorganized, but that's the MLS playoffs for you. Then we're going to highlight a game each. We're going to go into a little discussion if we think the best of three system for the first round is the ideal system. I think in conclusion, there is no right answer. Everything is wrong. It's all a mess. It's going to be a mess either way. We're going to get a little to a U.S. men's national team roundup. We're going to approach it a little differently, spending a little more time on some individual players who we think are ones to watch for the rest of the season, either those who need a move or those who just haven't been getting enough love because we've been kind of rapid firing through it so far. But anyway, without further ado, let's look at some recent results. LAFC, big winners over Austin last night, 4-1. They'll advance. Heung-min Son, Dennis Bwanga looking real in form. Columbus, 4-0 over Cincinnati. That one's going to a decisive third game. Vancouver in penalties over Dallas. That'll wrap up that series. Portland over San Diego in penalties. That levels that series at 1-1. Nashville beat Miami on a rainy day in Nashville 2-1. That series goes to a third. Philadelphia ousted Chicago 3-0. That's 2 games up for the Philadelphia, which means they have clinched the series. And then Charlotte beat NYFC in penalties in a game they had no business even drawing. But that's the MLS playoffs, baby. And then we got decisive match between, Seattle versus Minnesota tonight. Seattle need to win to keep their season alive. Joe, we're going to start with you in Nashville. Wet one.
It was a wet one. It was a chaotic one. It was a great game. As you said, obviously they won 2-1. Dramatic game, one that Miami will probably be kicking themselves that they didn't win. They obviously had the chance to progress to the next round. They won the first game 3-1. This game did not go according to plan for them, but Nashville played amazingly. Just to kick it off, Sam Surridge and Hani Mukhtar have been linking up all season, and that was how the game kicked off. Hani Mukhtar was in his own half, played an incredible ball over the top. The Miami defense was completely sleeping, and Surridge took full advantage. The keeper was in no man's land, took it around him, was tripped, and then converted from the penalty spot. Now, just an interesting one on the goalkeeper. Oscar Astari has been, Miami's goalkeeper for quite a while. Mascherano has made a change in net towards the end of the season. He brought in Rocco Rios Novo, who is a youth international for Argentina. He's on loan from Lanús, and he's decided that he is the man for the playoffs. He's played both games so far. He didn't look great, I'll be honest, and it was very much a catastrophic error, just clumsy from him to give away the penalty. And Miami were on the back foot from that moment. And it went from bad to worse just before half-time. Josh Bauer, the defender, bundled home from a corner. He scored a few important goals this season for Nashville, and then this was another one, but another defensive mistake. Hani Mukhtar whipped the ball into the 6-yard area from a corner kick. No one challenged it. The keeper didn't even come for it. The ball rattled around as a bit of a goalmouth scramble, but Bauer got the decisive touch to put them 2 up. Now, as much as I've complained about the defending, of course, this season, Miami going forward have been incredible. They have one of the best players still in the world in Lionel Messi. Luis Suarez obviously come towards the end of his tenure, which I'll get into in a minute. But you can never keep Messi quiet all game, or it's hard to. Nashville kept him really contained. They did a really good job until the 89th minute. A bit of lack of fitness from a defender. They let Messi onto his left foot, which you cannot do on the edge of the area. Not only did he fool the defenders, he fooled the goalkeeper. He went near post. It was a fantastic finish, but it wasn't enough to spark a miraculous late comeback. They lost 2-1. They will have to play a decisive game 3 at home, which I'm sure they'll fancy themselves back in Fort Lauderdale. But it just adds a little bit of spice. Obviously, last week we were saying that they were nailed on to win the MLS Cup. Now there's a little bit of doubt. It's going to be very interesting. But just a couple notes, as I said, Luis Suarez really looked off it in this game. He lacked that yard of pace. He just looked tired. He did have one really good opportunity in the first half. He himself rounded the goalkeeper, clipped the inside of the post, and he had a few decent chances, but just didn't look on it. And Allende, I don't know how he didn't score. I think actually this time, this would have been a return for Suarez. He put a ball right across the 6-yard box. Allende could have just blew the ball in. It was an open net. and he missed it. And he complained that he got pulled down. He didn't. He has to do better. And it was very much a case of Messi leading them again. They need other guys to step up, and we will see if they do so in game 3.
What do you think happens in the third game?
I think they'll do it. Yeah, I'd be very surprised if they lost that decisive game at home. But Nashville made a statement, and they deserve that win. They were really strong. They're a great team. They're a great unit. They have a lot of cohesion in that team. Whereas I think Messi, that sums it up. I think Miami kind of relies on these specific guys sometimes. But I think they'll be fine. It's early on. The first round's always tense, and Miami has history of losing early on when they shouldn't. But I think they'll have enough to get it done. But I don't know. There's always an upset on the cards, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, now it opens the door where they could lose. And in a one-off game, like literally anything can happen, like weather, like anything. It can go to penalties very easily. You know what I mean? I think Miami are very clearly better than Nashville, but we're at a point where you don't know what's going to happen. And that's really, really scary for a Miami side that I still think is far and away, obviously, the best attack in the league, probably one of the best attacks in MLS history, on the brink. And not really because they've played bad, just because they dominated one game, lost a tight one in the second that was inexperienced goalkeeping, blah, blah, blah. And now they're on the ropes. That's the MLS playoffs, baby. That's how it is. Looking also in the Eastern Conference, Columbus 4-0 winners across their state rivals since Cincinnati FC, who have FC Cincinnati, not a great team this year, but kind of scraped their way to the 2 seed by hook and by crook on a series of 1-0 victories all season. Their luck ran out. Very interesting for Columbus. Obviously, they're missing their marquee signing for midseason, their Palestinian striker. They signed for about 7 or 8 million. Jonas Chiberko is on the bench. Daniel Gazdag is on the bench. Diego Rossi was not, and he looked really, really dangerous. Laid off to Maxi Arfstan for a little flick on, and Arfstan obviously making his signature bombarding run from left wing back. Got the first. It was a horrible tackle by Kubo for Cincinnati in the 38th minute. Dylan Chambost, what a freaking free kick, excuse me, from outside the box. Cincinnati were man down, and at that point the game was not effectively over, 100% over. Aaron Herrera at the back post for 3, Russell Rowe for 4, and this one was a complete blowout. Columbus really struggled for goals in the second half of the year. They struggled for goals all season, really. Obviously, they sold Cucha Hernandez, their best goal scorer from a season ago, right before the start of the MLS campaign, kind of late in the winter window, and didn't immediately push to bring in a new signing. Daniel Gazdag came in a few months later, and he didn't quite like the lead on fire the same way he did for Philadelphia Union over the last, however many, he's been there, it seems like forever. The attack never fully kicked on. This is a team that's really built on continuity, built on strong attacking principles, creating chances, very modern analytical side that kind of always trusts the process. And that isn't always what works in knockout football, but it worked today. Obviously, they were up a man. On the road, can they come in and outplay Cincinnati, who will be without Kubo, as in such a dominant fashion once again? I don't know. They couldn't in the first game, even though I thought they were pound per pound hanging with Cincinnati. But I really think this series is truly a roll of the dice. In my gut, Columbus are the better team. I'm happy Darlington Nagbe's career didn't end just yet, but I just think Cincinnati kind of have those moments players. Obviously, all it takes is one of Van der Strijk, and that's it to call it a series. But I don't think Cincinnati, even if they advance past this round, are really contenders.
Yeah, and I know on this podcast, we, speak a lot about United States players that are abroad playing well. I just want to give a shout out to someone you've already mentioned, Max Arfstan. I thought he looked so good in that game. And he obviously got the goal to open up with, which the awareness to make that run and to be there as the assistance for when there was a defensive mistake and he was there to pounce on it is really, really promising and exciting to see. You need that, especially if he's going to be on that World Cup roster. He got an assist as well. But the second goal, it was him winning the ball back and then playing it down the line, a key pass. Then he assisted the assist, if you know what I mean. He just looks so strong. And he's become a real key player in this team. I'm pretty sure he got the All-Star call up for them. He just looks great. And I think he really, really flexes muscles in this game. And they're going to need him to keep doing that if they're going to progress in these playoffs.
And if they don't progress in these playoffs, he's a contender to move abroad, certainly in the winter transfer window. All right, so these series have been very weird. Obviously, I don't think there hasn't been one where it's like both leg besides LAFC, where it's just like the one team is so convincingly better than the other, demonstrably without a shadow of a doubt. There's been some parity in almost every matchup, but I thought it'd be good for us to look at kind of the history of the MLS playoff system, the schedule for this year's playoff system, and what we think, given the time, history of the league, and whatnot, is the ideal solution for the first round of the playoffs. And again, it's hard to compare to other international systems because America is the only country adamant to have a full tournament to decide a league champion. Anyway, let's look at the history of the MLS playoffs. Obviously, the MLS hasn't been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, but in 1996, when it started, there was a best of three in the first round. And how were playoff games decided that were tied? They went to the famous MLS style penalty shootout, which I am in favor of. I just think it should come back. It favors skill more than pure luck, and I think it's a better matchup. Anyway, eventually the MLS playoffs in 2000 went to a 3-game total point system. So 3 points for a win, 1 for a draw, 0 for a loss. So if you were to win 1 game and draw 2, you automatically advance. I still think that's a better system than penalty shootouts, which are just literally coin flips. These are all professional athletes. They all know how to kick a ball, penalty, it just nerves, whatever. Like a third tier side can beat a top tier side, and it doesn't really say anything about the quality. It's just total randomness. Yes, some goalkeepers are good at penalties, but and sure, there's some mental things going on, but I always think eliminate penalty shootouts if you can. 2003, it goes into a 2-leg aggregate first round. This is my preferred system. Something about a 2-legged tie is very principled to the game, and it's very fundamental. I think being able to score a third goal in the first game, you're already up 2-0, should matter. Especially when you're only playing for 180 minutes or 270 minutes. Like, you want as many things to count that show who is the better team. I don't like it when it's the worst side just has such an advantage, and even an advantage to tank for a penalty shootout that is disproportionately favors the team that is worse. If that makes sense. 2007, the playoffs really expand. The wildcard era grows, but we're sticking with the 2-legged aggregate first round. 2011, we have the 2-legged aggregate quarters and semis. Play-in round comes in at the beginning. 2015, more play-ins. 2019, we move to a single elimination model where top seed gets buys just to kind of accommodate the amount of teams in the playoffs. And then in 2023, we move to the best of 3 system. I'm not a single elimination person. I'm a 2-legged aggregate person. But before we get into that, Joe, let's hear about the format and the time frame of this year's MLS playoffs, which are just very interestingly shoehorned around the international calendar.
Very interesting indeed, and very long. I mean, the first round is 3 weeks long. Game 1 will play between October 24th and October 29th, bearing in mind the final isn't until the first week of December. So a very, very long, drawn out process, but it is what it is. So game 1 between October 24th and 29th. It's been a bit of controversy with, teams playing late at the end of the first game and then playing their second game quite early. But those game 2s are played over course of November 1st to 3rd. And then game 3, if necessary, is November 7th until the 9th. Now, here's where it becomes interesting. Whereas you'd think, okay, now we're going to move into the conference semi-finals and the finals. Not quite. There's an international break sandwiched in between that. So the momentum is completely lost. So the international break spans from the 10th to the 18th of November. The US in particular has 2 games, one on November 15th against Paraguay and one on November 18th, right at the end of the window against Uruguay. And then quite a quick turnaround for the conference semi-finals, a one-off match, as Jeremy said, that we played on between the 22nd and 23rd of November, before the conference finals, on the 29th to the 30th of November, all before that big MLS Cup final on December 6th. It seems like a very long process. I mean, I guess you could say it kind of draws out the excitement, and they've obviously got to fit it around other leagues, other sports. Unfortunately, that's kind of where MLS is at the moment. But to me, we're going to get into it, but I just feel like it loses the momentum, it being that long, especially having that break in the middle. You're starting to get the ball rolling and starting to get really invested in these playoffs. And then suddenly, no, we're back to US. Oh, we're back again. I'm not sure.
What you can, I mean, if you want to think about what can be done, is everything single elimination. Maybe shift the entire season one up 1 week, and you finish the MLS playoffs by the time this international break even starts. That's one solution. Obviously, the calendar next year is going to be completely out of whack because of the World Cup right in the middle of the summer. There's always a million jillion variables going on. Obviously, FIFA has talked about changing international break systems going forward, going from 3 to 2 in the fall. That's going to change things and help things. It just seems like whatever the MLS would try would be the wrong answer, and someone's going to be upset, and there is a better solution. I don't think what's currently happening is the worst thing, but having a break in the middle of the playoffs is just, I feel like, cuts the legitimacy of it, right?
I agree. I mean, the solution is one thing, but I think we're both in agreement of it should finish before that break, whether it is, like you said, moving the season up, or I know they've talked about changing schedules entirely, but I just think you've got to try and avoid that and try and get it done before then. I know obviously it's excitement, the start of December, etc. But and I also just best of threes, I'm not a big fan of when it comes to football or soccer anyway. I also don't like you were saying, the fact that you could have every game go to a penalty shootout. And that just feels wrong to me. And, I heard, obviously, you mentioned about the old style MLS penalties. I know that they got memed a little bit back in the day, but could you imagine the attention the league would get if they went back to that now, like being the only one to have that and have Messi dribbling up and doing all of that? I think it would be great. But in terms of the playoffs, I think it should have been done earlier. I don't like a best of three, especially not in the first round. Obviously, that's something that you imagine when it's more at the crunch end of things, and you want to see the best quality advance. But I like the two-legged aggregates. That's something obviously we see in Europe all the time. Something I've grown up with. I don't mind an elimination game just being the whole way through, kind of NFL style. But the best of three, in my opinion, isn't the one.
Yeah, if it's it's a single elimination game. Obviously, it has to be at the higher seeds venue, and it has to have full extra time. You can't have a single elimination game go straight to penalties. That's incredibly unfair. You think in a two-legged aggregate, away goals or no away goals?
So I know away goals is kind of a thing of the past now. They've got rid of it in Europe, in European competitions. They've got rid of it in others. I always like it just because it gives that team going away from home something more to play for. So often now you see when teams are away from home, they just sit back and try their best to defend. When that goal goes in and you suddenly need two, it just opens up the game. And that, for me, is exactly what MLS and kind of American sports is all about, that added entertainment, which is what the away goals brings. But either way, I think you said it perfectly earlier in terms of, you're 2-0 up at home and you go for that third goal because it could be crucial. Famously, we're both Liverpool fans. We saw Barcelona beat Liverpool 3-0. Liverpool won 4-0 in the second leg. Dembele, who just won the Ballon d'Or, missed a sitter that could have made it 4.
Yep.
Is always important. And yeah, I agree. I don't like best of three. Single elimination two-legged, I could be swayed either way. But either way, I think that the momentum needs to keep rolling. Having, week break or so between games. It could be every 4 days, it could be every 5. Obviously, it's a big strain. But if you remove that extra game that we don't need, then it kind of makes up for it.
Yeah, you want to reward the teams that play well across the entirety of the first round, not just scrape a 0-0 and then win 7-6 on penalties. I don't think that does anyone a favor. It doesn't. It's just not it's a different sport. At least the old MLS penalties resemble the game that's actually played on the field. A penalty shootout is a free throw contest. It just doesn't matter. It's so random and it's so stupid. It drives me crazy. But I think the best of three is here to stay. Also, it's an extra game. An extra game is more revenue, and obviously it's going to be hard to take matches off the calendar, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's another case of, what the fans want just in terms of entertainment compared to what works business-wise, which in sport nowadays is all that really matters and all that's ever going to prevail. But anyhow, I'm sure they can improve it, and I'm sure they will make improvements based on feedback. But of course, it's always going to have to be with those investors and that revenue in mind.
And that always seems to win. All right, let's head to a quick break. Hey, if you want to get involved in the conversation, shoot us an email at jeremy.goldstein@reachplc.com. Please engage by subscribing to the show wherever you get podcasts. Leave us a like while you're at it. That's the end of part 1 of this week's All Out Soccer, but stick around for part 2 just after this break. All right, Joe, we're back. We're going to do a little U.S. men's national team roundup differently, hyper focus on some individuals. So we're going to start off with each have a player. We're going to talk about some recent things they're in the news for. Nothing negative, just what they're in the news for. We're going to pick one player each to just kind of highlight and do a little deep dive. Players maybe we've mentioned but not gone in depth about in any sort of substance. And then after, for our World Cup segment, not a big World Cup news week this week, so we figured we'd talk about players who need a move ahead of the 2026 World Cup from the U.S. men's national team pool, either to achieve earn more playing time, or put themselves in a bigger spotlight to earn a spot and impress Coach Pochettino. Okay, looking at little news items, Joe, what do you have for us on Chris Richards this week?
Yeah, slightly different way of doing it, but Chris Richards, of course, gets mentioned by me yet again. Great player, but potential bit of beef here between Crystal Palace, his club, and his national team, the US men's national team. We've seen it for a long time where, clubs are quite hesitant sometimes to let key players go, especially when it's in the Americas. You see it with a lot of the Brazilian players when it's a long trip. The potential for injury increases and they want to keep them fit, and they're key players. If they could, they would just have them playing club football. So, Chris Richards was in the recent break with the friendlies against Ecuador and Australia and played in both. He only played for about 17 minutes against Ecuador. He played the full 90 in the 2-1 win against Australia. All good. Oliver Glasner, the Crystal Palace manager, was not happy. He alleged that he had a calf injury heading into the break, and he asked Pochettino if he could be rested despite being with the squad in terms, to fully recover, and it'd be better for him, be better for Pochettino in the future to avoid a potential long-term injury. And he had some choice comments. He said, "My only complaint is that the US team did not talk to us because we knew Chris was struggling. We talked to them and said they should rest. He played twice. It's very disappointing. On the other side, we've tried to manage his minutes here," which isn't true. He plays every week. And also on his return, he didn't play against Liverpool in the EFL Cup. He didn't need to. Liverpool played a bunch of kids and then lost 3-0 at home. Absolute disgrace, but that's a conversation for another day. He played the full 90 minutes of the weekend against Brentford, 2-0 win. He was fine. This is a classic case. What I assume, of course, you're concerned about your players, but this happens all the time where managers, are critical of national teams, of how they use the players, especially for games that don't have a competitive edge on the line. For the US, they kind of do. They're figuring out what they want to do for the World Cup next year, one of the biggest years in soccer history for them. And he played. He's fine. It's a moan about nothing, but hopefully it's not something that we see moving forward because, Richards is key for both Palace and the US, and we want to make sure everyone's happy.
Yeah, for me, it's more of an issue with the UEFA calendar, if anything, which obviously have like Palace this season in Europe for the first time. They play a whole lot of Conference League games. There's no groups, so they're kind of competing against the whole pack. And to earn a bye, they need to get a certain amount of wins. So they actually need to try in these random games, go into Finland, wherever they're going. And Richards has been playing a bunch of these games, and playing Thursday, Sunday is a tight turnaround, especially when you're traveling from an away day, the other side of Europe. I think that's more of the issue. Now, Glasner didn't receive a lot. His club didn't invest a lot this summer, so there isn't a lot of backup for Richards at the club. And I think that's more of the issue here. If there was backup for him at the club, he wouldn't be playing twice a week, but he is. And I have no problem with Richards. It seemed like prioritizing the United States over Palace this season. Looking at another U.S. men's national team player I don't want to compare him to Richards because he doesn't have an automatic spot in the U.S. starting 11. That's Weston McKennie, who should have a starting spot in the U.S. 11. He did have a starting spot for Luciano Spalletti in his first game in charge of Juventus this weekend. Since McKennie joined Juventus in 2020 from Schalke, his managers have been, where is this written down? Andrea Pirlo, Max Allegri, Thiago Motta, Igor Tudor, and now Luciano Spalletti. He started his first game under Spalletti. It was a 2-1 win over Cremonese. He started kind of at right center mid, like right winger, like inverted winger position, played very high up the pitch. He's 27. His legs aren't what they used to be when he was younger. Spalletti opted for a more conservative midfield too. All of this screams about McKennie's profile is, I don't know if he's going to be trusted in the center of midfield with one other midfielder in this new 3-5 3-4-2-1 system that Pochettino's been playing. So if he's not trusted there, and it's either going to be Tyler Adams and Christian Roldan, Tyler Adams and Tanner Tessman, Aiden Morris, whoever it is, I think McKennie still starts for this team, and he's not the striker, and he's not Pulisic. So is he the third attacking player? Is it Malik Tillman? I don't know. There's just a lot of uncertainty about what position. Weston McKennie's also been playing wingback this season at spots. He is clearly viewed as an attacking player at this point. When he came up, he was more of a defensive midfielder. It's not the most uncommon thing for players to make a transition around the pitch, but it's often further down as opposed to further up. So it's a very just interesting spot. I don't really know what to make of it.
Yeah, I mean, we said even earlier in kind of this podcast series about his versatility being sometimes an asset, but sometimes also a hindrance. The fact that he can play anywhere makes him way more attractive to a coach and increases his chance of getting on the field. But at the same time, if you don't lock down that role, it kind of can work against you at times. But I don't know. I'm trying to see the positives. I'm happy that he's playing. He's had a bit of a tough time at Juventus and was very heavily linked with leaving the club. The fact that he stayed and that he's got a start under the new manager is obviously great to see. Hopefully that continues. And they got a win too in a game that Jamie Vardy scored, which I think is hilarious. I just wanted to mention.
Yes. What a weird timeline we're living in. All right, Joe, who do you have? You want to pick out one player just to give a little diatribe on, or someone we haven't maybe shown too much love yet on this show?
Yeah, well, a potential partner in defence of Chris Richards is Mark McKenzie. He plays over in France for Toulouse. I'm sure everyone's aware of this, but he's become he's become a key player for them. There's no other way to say it. This guy started at Philadelphia, was highly thought of there and earned a move to Belgium where he played for Genk. He moved to Toulouse in 2024. It didn't seem like the move went too well at Genk, but he's very much revived his career over in France. Now, Toulouse are, a very historic team in France. They went for a bit of tough times towards, COVID, and they got dumped out of League One. They since came back up in 2022 with fresh investment, won the French Cup in 2023, which was only the second in their history. But this season, he's looked really, really strong. He didn't play the most recent game after a knock in training, but before that, he'd started and played every single minute of their League One campaign, all 10 games. He's become a stalwart at the back for them. Interestingly, look at his market value. They bought him for $6 million. That's since rise to about 7.5, which isn't too bad for only a year's difference. And he's still only 26. He scored last season. He hasn't scored yet. He's a defender. Doesn't matter too much, but he's really, really highly thought of in Toulouse. And I think with Cameron Carter-Vickers being injured, I don't think this guy is going to potentially always be a starter, but with a lack of options, I definitely think he'll be involved. And interestingly, Mauricio Pochettino has quite a strong affinity with him. He has looked at him and believes that he can become like a Cutty Romero style at Tottenham. He said this publicly. He really wants him to embrace that kind of warrior, a bit of a tough guy at the back. And he certainly seems to be doing so. And the Toulouse coach has nothing but positive things to say about McKenzie, which is also good. And he says that he's more than just a player on the pitch. He just seems to embody everything that he wants in the dressing room, in the training ground, just that guy to have around. He said he's meticulous. He watches matches. He's focused on intensity. When anyone in the team is a bit sluggish, he is the first to urge them to give them their all. He has the personality to convince others that we can be better, and he is everything that I want in a defender. That is as high praise as you're going to get. And the fact that Pochettino is obviously a fan of him, I think, he's got a real kickstart in his career in terms of revival, and I think he should be, if he's playing like this until the summer, he should be involved. And I think he can be an exciting player, whether it's off the bench or not.
I mean, I'm ready to run through a wall for him right now after that. Pretty convincing.
Yeah, and also Toulouse as well. And this is a big, he's a big part of this. They've struggled in recent times, as I said. They've come back and established themselves in the top division of France. They're ninth this season. They have a record of 4-3-4, relatively average in terms of results. But, they're playing well. They're up there. He's been very consistent in every single game. The only game he had a pretty poor rating online was against PSG, but that's because they, allowed 6 goals. But then again, PSG are one of the best teams in the world. But I think it's an exciting one to watch. And I think, assuming he stays on form, he could definitely be someone that's rising in terms of stock.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout. And I think the center back position is definitely the one in the most flux outside of the striker position in the most flux for the U.S. men's national team. I think there's a good chance we're talking about starting center back Mark McKenzie for the U.S. men's national team next summer, especially if he keeps up the strong form this season. I'm also going to stay in France. I was worried we were going to have picked the same player, but I'm going in central midfield as a potential partner to Tyler Adams in the midfield too, and that's Tanner Tessman. Comes from the FC Dallas Academy once a long time ago, made his way to Venezia, where he's played next to Gianluca Busio. He had 9 goal involvements in Serie B 2 years ago. Linked moved to Inter Milan, ended up at Lyon a season ago, only started 13 times in the league. But this year he already has 9 starts, 11 games. He was substituted earlier over the weekend because of a red card to someone else on the pitch, but he is definitely first choice for Lyon, who are a Europa League side this season, starting next to Tyler Morton, ex-Liverpool Academy player. Where does he grade well? What does he profile as? He's someone who rates really highly in terms of shots per 90 minutes, passes completed, take-ons, and touches in the final third. So he's much more of an offensive engine, but he sits from deep. If you look at his average position on the pitch, it's not always the highest up. He's a little more of I don't want to say someone who pops up in the final third. Obviously, he does have a rocket on him. He did have a shot in the Europa League that went for a miraculous goal a few months ago that kind of was trending across social media. He profiles as like one not name, obviously a little niche, but his most comparable player is Felix Nemecha for Dortmund, who is an attacking midfielder who kind of moved into a defensive midfield role and sits in a midfield too in Dortmund, mostly when he was healthy last season next to Emre Can in midfield. So he's an attacking player who sits deep, who is not someone who's going to get beaten a ton defensively, but is not going to kind of put in that defensive numbers and also those deep progressive carry numbers that you kind of want from a lone number 6. So that's why I think he's a profile. If he sits next to Tyler Adams, that would kind of make sense for me. If Pochettino wants someone a little more who's going to break up a little more of a tackle, you could totally look in another direction. There's a ton of players like that in the U.S. pool, players who are just good ball winners and not much else. But if he wants kind of a deep progressive playmaker who could provide value in the final third, Tanner Tessman is the pick for me.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with him too. It's, nice little kind of link up in France at the moment with Timothy Weah, obviously too. It seems to be a good place to go. It's a very physical league, so all good for the US. I'm happy they're all kind of going out and trying in these new places. Obviously, Weah had that famous link with his father there. So, it's an exciting time. I know we were quite negative, earlier this season with how the US were playing, but I think everything's kind of coming together a bit now.
Yeah, not a lot of Americans in France a few years ago, and now there's a bunch of them. All right, we're going to wrap up this podcast this week talking about, because again, not a heavy World Cup news week. There's going to be a lot more World Cup news items during the international break, we figure. So let's talk about U.S. players we think could need a winter move. We're not going to go too in-depth with each one, but Joe, if you want to get us started with a player you think needs to move, either for more playing time or because they could elevate their profile at a bigger club.
Well, I think this guy needs to move for both reasons, to be honest. Yunus Musah, this guy, when he was coming through, this guy was in the Arsenal Academy, I believe, and he went to Valencia, really, really highly rated. He was on that golden boy list, went to AC Milan, obviously had that partnership with Christian Pulisic, which was really exciting for the US, of course. He left AC Milan in the summer, only on a loan deal, on deadline day. He wanted to leave. He made that quite clear. And they got him a move to Atalanta on loan, initial with an option to buy. Doesn't look like that's going to be happening because for some reason, despite really pushing to get him on loan, he hasn't been playing. He started the season, potentially their most difficult game of the season so far against Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League. They got pumped 4-0. It was not a pretty one. But since then, he hasn't started the game. He's played a total of 55 minutes in Serie A for Atalanta, and that's over a number of games. His largest contribution in all of that being just 16 minutes. And now there are strong reports saying that he wants to terminate that loan and look elsewhere. Obviously, the loan can be terminated at any time. I won't be able to, I don't believe, play for Milan because he won't be registered to their squad. So it's kind of pointless, cutting the loan short before January. But this is a guy that needs to move in January. I think his Milan career seems to be over given how things went in the summer. But he either needs to find somewhere else in Italy or just find somewhere else entirely. He needs to play. If he's playing, 8, 10, 12 minutes a game off the bench and not really inspiring much, then it's unlikely he's going to get picked for the World Cup, which I'm sure is his priority at this moment in time.
Yeah, he was starting in the 2022 World Cup, and he looked very, very impressive. Raw. He still is raw. He's still very, very young. He has a lot of minutes under himself for someone who is his age in the top 5 leagues. But yeah, I totally agree. He's someone who needs to move. Another player in the top 5 leagues, another central midfielder who I think needs a move. Loan move, for sure, because I think he's at a very, very big club right now, and that's Johnny Cardozo, who obviously earned a big move to Atletico Madrid over the summer, despite links to Tottenham, as part of a very bizarre pre-agreed to deal from Betis to Tottenham that I don't even fully understand. He started the opening game of the season for Atletico, which was a surprise, then was immediately benched. Then he was hurt, and he only returned last week, and he was on the bench and didn't play. When he did play this season, even off the bench, he did not look particularly impressive. For Betis, he was a good player. I think obviously maybe his profile was elevated by him being an American, and he also scored all of his goals seemingly in very, very big games. Atletico Madrid have a very crowded midfield. Koke and Pablo Barrios and Conor Gallagher and a host of other players. Diego Simeone plays people at a million different positions. I'm worried that Cardozo could be moved anywhere on the pitch. I think he needs to be starting week in, week out. A loan move back to Betis could make sense, to another club in Spain who need to give someone minutes. I think he just has to get out the door 100% in January.
He's a quality player. He needs to be playing. I mean, on one hand, Simeone is just such a talented coach, and I'd love for him to learn under him. But at the same time, if he's not learning and playing, he needs to go do it somewhere else.
Yeah. Just a few players to shout out. I want to say 2 MLS guys, Brian Gutierrez and Owen Wolf. Wolf was the best player in Austin FC this season. He looked really, really good in the playoffs, despite his team getting, kind of humiliated. These are players I would say upper mid-table club in either Belgium or the Netherlands could make a ton of sense, or somewhere maybe in the English Championship. Just a place where they can get playing time in a prominent European league, face different competition, and maybe one of them breaks through and forces their way into the U.S. men's national team picture. That just about wraps it up for this week's All Out Soccer. He's been Joe McBride. I've been Jeremy Goldstein. We hope you can join us again on the next episode. As Thomas Muller would say, Auf Wiedersehen. See ya.